Hey everybody, welcome to Monday. Yep, we're gonna talk male power fantasy today. We've been circling this on a few topics, but the Project Eve thing is really bringing it home. There's been repeated questions on repeated videos as why is male power fantasy treated as bad? Um, and I haven't had the opportunity to really make a video just about that topic. And I decided to do it now in part because it does tie into why Chris Pratt as Mario is a terrible fucking idea for a movie. But also, I've been really sick this month, and so the feeling of powerlessness is something really front of mind for me right now. So I thought this would be a good time to do this. There will be a little bit of Wellness Wednesday stuff in this video because it is some psychological concepts, but we're going to stick mostly to sort of the idea of male power fantasy. And if you like this stuff, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. Now, personally, I'm going to say flat out, I really have trouble relating to the idea of power fantasies being gendered. I do not believe, I'm living proof, that just because someone plays a character in a video game who is very powerful, that women can't get vicarious thrills from that the same way men do. I have all my life. I don't find it more fun to play a powerful woman. Now, perhaps that's because I've never actually played a character that's just a powerful woman for the sake of being a powerful woman. Except for, well, Hannah wasn't playable in Fable 2, Hannah the Hammer. But there are just so few female playable characters that are just straight up powerful. I mean, there was Lara Croft, and I enjoyed those games, but, I like those games for the gameplay once they got the rough edges smoothed out. And I like the stories, but games are games, right? I don't necessarily feel attached to male avatars in games, female avatars in games, but I tend to like the kind of ambivalent power fantasy games where you have these big tough dudes, but they're not invulnerable, and there tends to be this emotional journey that they go along that I can really relate to. I have to be pretty tough to do what I do in a lot of ways, and those sort of nods to the fact that you can't be tough all the time. Everybody has their weaknesses, like even Superman has kryptonite, and that's okay. I really relate to that. But obviously there has been this thing about male power fantasy, or more fancy pants, presumed male power fantasy, in games, and it's generally just assumed to be a bad thing. Now, is this true? Can we flat out say male power fantasies are inherently bad things? Well, no fantasy is inherently a bad thing. Everybody has some sort of fantasy at some point in their life. It's how we decide what we want out of life, right? If we keep thinking something's cool, or we really like to engage with a particular type of fantasy or fantasy role, that tells us about the things that are going to make us happy in life, right? And just as an aside, the thing that was so interesting about Mario for so many years is he wasn't, the big tough guy. He was a pudgy, hairy guy. A chubby, hairy guy fighting a turtle dragon ginger kid to rescue the pretty blonde princess, as Princess Sparkle Muffin calls it in boss fight. And so that gave chubby hairy guys a hero they could see themselves in. Now, you'll hear a lot of guys say they don't terribly care if they look like, the big bulging brutes in their fictional power fantasy. They just want to have fun with it, and that's totally fair. That may indicate a certain level of comfort with themselves, but I'm not going to speculate on that. There's a lot written about what fantasies do for people psychologically. I am a little bit hesitant to broad strokes this because a lot of it is kind of Jungian, and I don't think Jung is complete crap, but I think a lot of people use Jung to speculate instead of actually sticking to what's known. And so I'm kind of wary of that. But I do think that the characters that somebody really, really likes say a lot about them. Behold, my psyche behind me, and that's why I am very, very cautious and concerned about this idea that any sort of fantasy is inherently bad. The challenge with art is no matter how hard you try to separate yourself as a creator, you are dumping your hopes and dreams and fears out for the public to debate. This is an inherently uncomfortable thing, right? It is a very vulnerable thing. You create characters who say things that you don't necessarily agree with, but you do that in service of a greater sort of story arc or theme that was important enough for you to, set it down, get it made, and put it out in public so people can mock it and say humiliating things about you. That's the reality of being an artist. It has been as long as I've been in creative professions. If you have an incredibly successful career, it feels good as often as it feels terrible. For most people, you keep doing it because you like the work. The positive feedback you get never, ever supersedes the criticism and humiliation and rejection that is just inherent in it. So why do we do this stuff? We're kind of crazy, and maybe we just, if we like it, we hope someone else will like it, and that'll make life a little bit better for that person who liked it, right? And that's the thing. When we need to stop judging all art by the cynical paradigm of Harvey Weinstein's Hollywood, right? Hollywood is a terrible place. We all know that. It's full of vipers and parasites and predators. But we can't apply the same intents to all creators. And we certainly can't apply the same intents to non-Hollywood creators, right? Somebody makes a web comic. Is it the same cynical process of shitifying the work as the Hollywood development process? No, it's more pure, it's more intact. Now, do people internalize and emulate certain messages coming out of Hollywood media? Absolutely. But, Hollywood corrupting the idea of power fantasy, male or female, is not the same as power fantasies or sexual fantasies being inherently bad. And that's a very, very important distinction to make. We cannot look at individual depictions of characters or individual themes in a game or the execution of said characters and themes. We cannot do that in an objective way if we presume that all power fantasy is bad. I mean, take Life is Strange. Empathy is her power. Well, that's a power fantasy, right? People are going to say, but that's different. She's a woman. Well, if we're going for an equal paradigm, then if female power fantasies are fine, then male power fantasies are fine too, right? And it being different because it's a woman suggests the problem is not the power fantasy. The problem is about the nature of the most commonly used power fantasies, or the fact that things have just been too lopsided, too one-sided for too long. There's been too many male power fantasies and not enough female fantasies, or, friendship fantasies, or kindness fantasies. I maintain that no matter what, anything you offer up as a mechanic in an action-driven game is a form of power fantasy. So, getting into a semantic argument and trying to come up with new names and all of that, I don't think that's the most useful. I think that the idea of power does not have to be one of authoritarian domination. I think there can be forms of power that are benevolent. That's what I like about Superman so much, creepy pogo stick included. And I love about the Superman and Lois show that, Superman's Superman. He's super duper strong and he can fly real fast and all that stuff. But, the beautiful thing about Superman and Lois is that he didn't know what to do when his younger son was having a panic attack. That was, his mom knew how to do that. And that, to an extent, is creating sort of a Lois Lane power fantasy in a Superman and Lois show, right? Lois has something she can do better than him. It's a form of power fantasy, right? These aren't bad things. These aren't bad things. What we should be looking at is, are we telling stories that are just too damn similar? And is it a power fantasy? Or is it an abuse fantasy, right? Are you encouraging players to be powerful so they can help people? Or are you encouraging players to be powerful so that they can bully people? Now, then there's the philosophy that it is perfectly fine to create a game that allows a player to do the choice of both. Because the philosophy goes, if there is no choice, if the player is just railroaded into good actions, it's not as rewarding for the player to do good in game because it's not their choice, right? Now, individual mileage may vary. That, I think, is more of a performative gamer gaze thing, that a gamer like me, I'd be more, I'd probably get more of a boost out of choosing to play good, because that's what I do in RPGs. I choose to play as a good person. I'd probably get more of a jolt out of being able to choose to do it than being forced to do it. But I still like stories about good people. It's just, I'll watch a movie about that. I want more choices in my games. Then you get something like Ghost of Tsushima where, what is right, what is good, what is the best choice becomes a very, very gray area. And that game handled that very, very well. And then you get into the Spider-Man stuff. With great power comes great responsibility, and the wonderful job that, Insomniac did on those games. But if somebody has fun going around being an asshole in a game, that doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. They could be exploring something. They could be doing one of these things that's, a coping mechanism, relating to the aggressor. They may be very bullied, very picked on in their regular lives, and they're, identifying with the aggressor to try to process it and make sense of it. It's really not up to people to judge fictional choices, because for the vast majority of people, it is absolute fiction. That kind of thing in a video game is no different than teenage girls going all woohoo over BTS. By the way, Momo and I both like the Coldplay BTS song, the new song. Not that that matters, just we have consensus. Momo and I don't always agree on music. But I think it is bad scholarship. I think it is bad thought, not bad thoughts morally. Poor quality analysis. There we go. To just presume male power fantasy bad instead of male power fantasy in gaming has gotten stale and unoriginal, and we need to rethink things so it's not the same goddamn things all the time. You know, that's why I liked the Thick Thor. I liked the fact that the God of War team decided to reimagine what a really strong dude looks like. I would like to see more of that. I would like to see a greater variety of characters designed and make them look different so that their movesets are different, so that we can get a new kind of experience, so it isn't just some rehash of the same 4 action genres doubled for first person or third person point of view. I know that's a lot to ask, and I know that the AAA market is driven by power fantasy. Why? Because that's what people tend to like in escapist entertainment, and there is historical precedent for that. Historians point out that, you know, going back to comics, superheroes started becoming a huge thing in the late 30s and 1940s, when after a relative period of calm and security after World War I ended and people tried to get back to normal, here was the world right back again in the shit. And collectively, people started imagining heroes that could come in and look out for the little guy, because people were freshly recognizing that, you know, with these existential threats, not just to nations, but, you know, with the draft, and, you know, your draft number comes up, well, you know, you got to go off to war, or your husband had to go off to war, and then, you know, women went working, and then the men came back, and it's like, you really don't want to work anymore, ladies. And so what did we get in terms of female power fantasy? In the 60s and 70s, we got a superhero who was basically in her bathing suit or underwear. Take your pick of how you describe Wonder Woman's outfit. But that was, I interpret that as women, you know, in the era of the mini skirt and bright colors and big lashes, you know, it was women having been outside the home in a very real way for the first time in a very long time, finding out they enjoyed it, not wanting to go back to being invisible. Women wanted to be seen. In the 60s and 70s, straight through the 80s, we started to have, even the 90s was thong bodysuits and crop tops. But, you know, HIV kind of put the damper on that. We've really started to be in a very different place. And it really seems like the power fantasy now, at least for women, is to be an absolute mediocre hot mess, totally unremarkable, and have some guy just fall madly in love with you anyway. And that is still a power fantasy, right? I'm a mess, but this guy's still gaga for me. That's power fantasy, right? It's no different than the 80s trope of the nerd getting the hot girl. It's just reverse. And that's why I think that I challenge you to take the genders out of the fantasy and really question whether Supergirl is any different in inclination than Superman. Whether, I don't know, Captain Marvel is all that terribly different from Thor, really. I mean, the only difference is that, oh, sprinkle a bit of patriarchy in Captain Marvel, though I would argue that patriarchy is actually the villain in Thor, because as far as I'm concerned, everything's Odin's fault. That's half a joke, but so we're not going to get this. We're not going to create more inclusive, more interesting, fresher art in gaming or anywhere else if we start based on bad assumptions. And as one commenter pointed out, that male power fantasy is not all created equal because men of non-white races have a lot of stereotypes against them. And I mean, white guys are getting some too, I guess. But, you know, black and Latino men are sexually fetishized. They tend to be depicted as kind of hypersexualized in some media. Whereas, you know, Asian and East Asian and South Asian men tend to have this stereotype of being non-threatening, but therefore, you know, kind of non-sexual as well. So not all power fantasies are created equal. Then again, if you watch, like, there's a restaurant I go to and they play like Hindi and Tamil and like TV and movies and all that stuff, and those things are very elaborate, and I'm just saying I'm not stereotyping, but you know, when we think about power fantasy, the politics, the metaphors, the coding behind Superman's "it tickles" with the bullets bouncing off, and Luke Cage being a bulletproof black man, obviously there's a very different charge with Luke Cage than there is with Superman. And stuff like that, we go back to bell hooks and oppositional gaze and stuff like that, you know, using power fantasy to create space for men and women who historically have been vilified in a lot of media, but also, you know, for various reasons don't have the same base opportunities as some others. And, you know, I didn't say race there because poverty is poverty, right? I mean, there's intersection of poverty and race we don't have time to get into now. But if you put the not provable assumption that all male power fantasy is bad, inherently bad, well, that means Luke Cage is bad. That means Black Panther's bad. That means Falcon is bad. That means, like, oh, so what's the alternative? Oh no, these guys don't, they're not power. It's service. Relegating black people to service to make white audiences more comfortable. That's bad too. You see what I mean? The only thing we can say is no. power fantasies, male and female, are not inherently bad. An overuse of too many of one kind that sends the message that, say, only white dudes of a certain wealth are allowed to be powerful, nobody else is, well, that's a problem, right? And, suggesting that, say, black female power is scary, well, that's a problem, like inherently scary. If you want to tell a story about why it scares some white folk, there's a place for that. I enjoy stories like that. But, we have, and this is the problem with the Black Widow movie, the Captain Marvel movie. There is a discomfort, even some of the Disney Plus stuff like WandaVision, there is a discomfort, an unease with power fantasy when it's a woman. And I think that's tied into our being all twisted into knots about male power fantasy. And it's a problem we didn't have when Linda Carter was playing Wonder Woman back in the day. And it wasn't as big a problem in the original Wonder Woman movie, but it certainly was in Wonder Woman 1984, where it was all about Max Lord doling out power and Wonder Woman sort of being relegated to a narrator in places. That was, and again, it was a too many cooks thing. They were overthinking it instead of just telling the story of a beautiful, powerful woman who gets shit done. Let's find an enemy for these women that isn't the patriarchy, right? That isn't misogyny. How about tackling some sort of social issue or a specific type of problem? I don't know. We're not going to know until we stop being so uncomfortable with the idea of fantasy and with the idea of power. And, this is why I would prefer more artists and fewer academics adding to the discourse with this stuff. Not that there's not a role for academics. Ooh, bad double negative there. But I do believe there is a role for academics. There's a place. But an academic who exists in the very safe, very masculinized world of academic writing has no idea what it's like to have your ass hanging out in public as a creator of fictional stories. You have to put yourself into every character you play for it to be authentic. So I have to put myself into Social Justice Warrior. I have to put, that sounds rude, myself in a Princess Sparkle Muffin. I have to put myself in a Beelzebub and Zarkazan. And, if I'm phoning it in any of those characters, it's not going to work, right? And is there a certain amount of power fantasy playing a damsel in distress that saves the day? Hell yeah. Is there a certain amount of power fantasy where, you take the Wicked Witch and make her, like, as the TV tropes page said, more of a hot witch? She has a certain power over people. That's not totally understandable to me. I have never had that power over either the same sex or the opposite sex. I'm not drawn that way. Like Jessica Rabbit. There's nothing wrong with embodiments of power. In fact, we need those to decide what kind of power we want to wield. Some people want to be super strong. Some people want to be telepaths. This tells you about what skills you want valued in yourself, and they are important. And if we shame the process of understanding our desires by shaming power fantasy, we actually stunt our developmental growth and our capacity for wisdom. So that seemed smarter than I expected it to be. So I'm going to leave it there. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Every so often I just land in a good place. Thanks for watching.